It was a perfect afternoon in the quiet suburban neighborhood, a place where the sun shone bright, the trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the sidewalks were pristine. Every house on Oak Ridge Street had a carefully manicured lawn, each perfectly aligned mailbox standing at attention, and a sense of unspoken pride. Everything was in its place, at least until Karen noticed the moving truck. From her picture-perfect window, Karen, arms crossed, narrowed her eyes as the truck rolled slowly down the street. It was just the kind of moment that could unravel the fragile peace she worked so hard to maintain. Who does this family think they are? She fumed, watching as the truck parked in front of her meticulously kept house, blocking what she considered her sacred spot. Karen had always seen herself as the guardian of neighborhood order, an unofficial HOA enforcer without the official title. No one dared park too long in front of her house, no one let their lawn grow too wild, and certainly no one made the mistake of breaking the private property boundaries she'd set. It wasn't just about the rules, it was about her control. The rules were Karen's way of ensuring everything around her was pristine, untouched, and utterly perfect. But this, a moving truck parked in her space, this was an act of rebellion, a slap in the face. She watched with growing irritation as the family, a man, a woman, and 2 kids, began unloading boxes from the truck. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a faded t-shirt and worn jeans, and seemed entirely too relaxed for the situation. The woman had her hands full with a toddler, her smile bright despite the exhaustion on her face. And then there were the kids, running around, laughing, carefree. They seemed out of place, too loud, too energetic, as if their presence was disturbing the peace Karen so desperately craved. Karen stood at her window, the blinds half drawn, her hands clenched into fists. They don't belong here. Her mind began racing. She couldn't believe it. How dare they come into her neighborhood without asking for permission, parking in front of her home like they owned the street? She had never seen them before, didn't recognize them from any of the HOA meetings, and certainly hadn't approved of their invasion of her territory. Her eyes darted around the street, scanning for any other signs of trouble. No one else seemed to care. The other houses sat in perfect stillness, their occupants either too oblivious or too polite to notice the chaos unfolding right before them. This will not stand, Karen thought. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling with righteous fury. The 911 operator was just a call away, and she knew exactly what she needed to do. The sense of injustice rose in her chest, hot and heavy. With a deep breath, Karen punched in the numbers, her heart pounding in her ears. This was more than just an inconvenience. It was a violation. They were breaking the unspoken rules of the neighborhood. This had to be dealt with. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice crackled through the phone, distant but clear. This truck is blocking the street. Karen snapped, her voice high-pitched with frustration. It's taking up the whole road. They don't have permission to park here. I want it dealt with, right now. The words rushed out of her like a dam bursting, her anger mounting with every syllable. As she held the phone to her ear, waiting for a response, Karen's mind raced with visions of the officer arriving, of the truck being towed away, of the family being forced to apologize. The thought of restoring order to her neighborhood sent a surge of satisfaction through her veins. They'll regret this. But little did she know, Karen was about to make a grave mistake, one that would unravel everything she thought she controlled. Karen stood by the window, her fingers gripping the phone as if it were her lifeline. The seconds felt like hours. She could hear the distant hum of the moving truck's engine, the cheerful voices of the family, oblivious to the storm brewing in her chest. Each laugh that floated through the air made her blood boil. How dare they act so carefree on what she considered sacred ground? A chill ran down her spine as she clutched the phone tighter, trying to steady her shaking hand. Her pulse raced, and for a moment, she felt that familiar, almost intoxicating feeling of power. This is it. I'm doing the right thing. The thought soothed her, even as a knot of doubt tightened in her stomach. But it was too late now. She had made the call. The decision was made. The wheels of justice were in motion. The dispatcher's voice broke through her thoughts, calm and methodical. "Ma'am, can you confirm the location of the vehicle?" "Yes, yes," Karen practically shouted, her eyes still locked on the family outside. The man was carrying a couch now, grunting as he hefted it toward the house. The audacity. "It's in front of my house, 425 Oak Ridge Street. They're blocking the entire street. They're not even from here. They have no right to park in front of my property." The words tumbled out in a rush, each one laced with indignation. Karen's heart hammered in her chest as she imagined the police car pulling up, flashing lights illuminating the street. This will be over in minutes, she thought. Order will be restored. The dispatcher remained calm, her voice unwavering, as she asked for more details. Is the vehicle blocking access to the driveway or causing a significant hazard? Karen scoffed. It's blocking the street. It's causing chaos. It's impossible to even drive around it. This is a neighborhood, not a parking lot. People can't just park wherever they want. She took a sharp breath, feeling the rush of adrenaline course through her veins. You need to send someone immediately. I don't care if they're new here or not. Rules are rules. There was a pause on the other end. A brief moment where Karen thought she heard the faintest chuckle, but she dismissed it. The dispatcher continued in her neutral tone, but Karen could feel the eyes of the world on her. Her actions were justified. They had to be. This was the right thing to do. The moment stretched on. Karen could feel the weight of her anger pressing on her chest, suffocating her thoughts. The woman outside, the one who had been carrying boxes, was now talking to one of the kids who was running around, laughing, completely oblivious to the storm that was brewing just a few feet away. That's when Karen snapped. No one seems to care about the rules in this neighborhood anymore. She blurted into the phone, her voice rising. I've seen it happening for months. People parking wherever they want, doing whatever they want. This is my neighborhood, and I won't stand for it. The dispatcher remained composed. Ma'am, I understand you're frustrated. An officer will be dispatched to the location shortly. Please remain at a safe distance from the scene and avoid confrontation with the individuals involved. Karen almost dropped the phone in her rush to hang up. Her hand trembled as she ended the call, but a wave of satisfaction swept over her. The deed was done. The police would handle it. She was the one who had taken control of the situation. Still, as she stood at the window, staring down at the family as they continued unloading their boxes, something gnawed at her, a feeling she couldn't shake. Was she really doing the right thing? But Karen quickly dismissed the thought. No, she decided. She was in the right. She had to be. Outside, the family continued their work, unaware of the whirlwind that was about to hit. The officer would arrive soon, and Karen would be vindicated. In her mind, this was the beginning of her victory. But little did she know, the truth was about to come crashing down in a way she could never have anticipated. Karen's heart pounded as she paced back and forth in front of her window. Her eyes never left the moving truck, watching as the family continued to unload their boxes, completely unaware of the storm she had unleashed. The sound of boxes being dropped, the hum of the truck's engine. It all grated on her nerves like nails on a chalkboard. They're still there, she thought, a sharp pang of frustration twisting in her stomach. Why haven't the police shown up yet? A distant siren broke through her thoughts, and Karen's pulse quickened. She rushed to the front door, throwing it open just in time to see a squad car rolling slowly down the street, its lights flashing in the distance. Relief flooded through her chest. Finally, the officer was coming. Justice would be served. She straightened up, smoothing down her blouse as if preparing for an audience. The neighborhood was about to witness her triumph. The officer parked a few houses down and stepped out of the car, his boots hitting the concrete with a soft thud. Karen barely contained her excitement as he made his way toward her, his expression unreadable. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a uniform that commanded authority but lacked any real warmth. His eyes scanned the area, then flicked briefly toward Karen, who was standing at the edge of her driveway, hands clasped tightly in front of her. She didn't waste a moment. Stepping forward, she pointed dramatically at the moving truck. "There," she said, her voice sharp with indignation. "That's the problem. It's blocking the street. They're breaking the law by parking here. I've tried to be patient, but enough is enough." The officer's eyes flicked between Karen and the truck, then back to Karen, his face still calm. He nodded slowly, as if taking in the situation but not quite convinced. "I see," he said, his voice neutral. "Let's take a look, shall we?" Karen practically seethed with impatience as the officer made his way to the moving truck, his footsteps slow and measured, as if he had all the time in the world. The family continued to work, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. The man was now carrying a dresser, while the woman directed their 2 children to move a box toward the door. Their laughter rang out like a cruel reminder of how Karen saw them, invaders, disrupting her perfect world. The officer approached the family, flashing a polite but businesslike smile. "Excuse me, folks," he said, his voice even but firm. "I've received a complaint about your truck blocking the street. Is everything all right?" The man, who had been hefting the dresser, paused and wiped his brow. "Oh yes, officer," he said with a relaxed smile. "We just moved in, so we're unloading a few things. No one's been having trouble getting through." He motioned toward the truck, which was parked neatly along the curb, well within the lines. "We're just getting settled in." Karen's breath caught in her throat as she watched the officer nod, making a note on his notepad. What? The situation was beginning to feel off. The officer's casual demeanor didn't match the tension in her chest. He wasn't rushing to reprimand the family, wasn't even showing signs of being bothered by the truck. No, this can't be happening. Karen took a step closer, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, her voice rising with urgency. "They're new here. They're taking up valuable space," she blurted, desperate for the officer to see things her way. "This is my neighborhood, and they need to follow the rules." The officer raised an eyebrow, his gaze flicking over to her. "Ma'am," he began, his voice still calm but carrying a slight edge. "This is a public street. There are no restrictions on parking here." He turned back to the family, who nodded in agreement, now looking at Karen with faint curiosity. Karen's stomach dropped. Public street. Her breath hitched as the realization hit her, like ice water splashing across her skin. She had been so sure, so certain, that the street in front of her house was private property, part of her meticulously crafted illusion of control. "No," she thought, panic beginning to creep in. "There must be a mistake." The officer glanced back at Karen, his face unreadable. "Ma'am," he said gently, but firmly, "there's nothing illegal about what they're doing. They're perfectly within their rights to park here." Karen stood frozen, the world around her spinning. The officer's words seemed to echo in her ears, the finality in his tone sinking in. Perfectly within their rights. The truth she had worked so hard to ignore was crashing down on her, unraveling everything she thought she knew about her neighborhood, her rules, her power. The officer didn't wait for a response. He turned back to the family, continuing to chat with them about the logistics of their move, completely dismissing Karen's presence. She could hear her heart thudding in her chest, the sound loud in her ears. How could I have been so wrong? The realization was suffocating. Karen's mind raced for a way to regain control, to somehow twist the situation back in her favor. But as the family carried another box inside, and the officer walked toward his cruiser, she knew she was losing her grip on everything she'd built. The truth had arrived, and it was far worse than she had imagined. Karen stood there, frozen, her breath shallow and erratic. The officer had turned his back to her and was now speaking calmly to the family, making small talk as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. But everything felt wrong. Her world was tilting off its axis, and she couldn't seem to find her footing. Public street. The words echoed in her mind, reverberating in a way that sent her heart pounding in her ears. She had built her life around control, around knowing the rules, and this was a violation she couldn't stomach. The officer was ignoring her complaints fading into the background, as if she were just another piece of noise. Her grip on reality felt slippery, her tightly woven world beginning to unravel. "Ma'am," the officer called, pulling Karen from her spiraling thoughts. "Are you all right?" His voice was gentle, but there was a touch of impatience now. He wasn't here to argue with her. He was here to wrap things up. Karen opened her mouth to protest, to argue that she knew the rules better than anyone, that she was right. But her words got caught in her throat, the realization sinking deeper with each passing second. She didn't have the power she thought she did. Instead, she swallowed hard, stepping closer to the officer, desperate for some kind of confirmation, some kind of acknowledgement that her anger, her right, still mattered. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound authoritative. The officer's eyes flicked over to her. He didn't seem surprised by her question, just resigned. "Yes, Mom. This street is public. Anyone can park here. That truck is parked legally." Karen felt her world crumble beneath her feet. It was like the ground had shifted, and suddenly, she wasn't standing on solid ground anymore. Public street. It was an undeniable fact. She had been wrong, and that reality hit her like a ton of bricks. Before Karen could find the words to argue further, a voice from behind her made her stomach drop. Well, looks like someone's finally caught up to you." Greg, Karen's neighbor, the one who always seemed to know everything about everyone, stood a few feet away, a wry grin tugging at his lips. He had been lurking in the background, watching the entire scene unfold, and now he seemed all too pleased to insert himself into the middle of it. Karen's face flushed with embarrassment. "Greg, stay out of this," she snapped, but it came out weaker than she intended. "Oh, I've been in this for a while now," Greg said with a chuckle, crossing his arms and glancing at the officer. "You see, Karen," he continued, his voice dripping with the kind of smug satisfaction that Karen despised, "the house they're moving into. It was sold just last week." Greg's words hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. Karen's stomach lurched as she turned to look at the family again. The man, who had been smiling and joking with the officer, gave her a friendly but puzzled look, as though trying to figure out if she was all right. Karen's pulse quickened, a wave of panic washing over her. "No, this can't be right." She turned back to Greg, her face pale. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice faltering. They've been here for days now," Greg interrupted, his grin widening. "They're your new neighbors. Didn't you see the neighborhood posts? They introduced themselves in the group chat last week. Everyone's been talking about them." Karen blinked, feeling like she had been punched in the gut. Her mind reeled, and the room seemed to tilt. The group chat. She racked her brain, but it felt like she had missed everything. She had been so focused on enforcing her own rules, her own sense of control, that she had completely ignored the simple truth. The new family had been welcomed here, by everyone but her. The officer, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, gave Karen a sympathetic look but didn't say anything. He turned back to the family, who were now watching with raised eyebrows. The woman smiled at the officer, clearly unaware of the drama unfolding around her. Greg chuckled again. "I guess you didn't get the memo, huh, Karen? You're not the only one who lives here anymore. And I don't think anyone's interested in your little private property game." Karen's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time, she felt a deep, gnawing sense of vulnerability. Her stomach twisted with humiliation. How had she missed all of this? The family had been here all week, and she hadn't even noticed. How could she have been so blind, so wrapped up in her own misguided sense of authority? The world around her seemed to close in as Greg's words echoed in her mind. She was no longer the enforcer, the keeper of order. She was just another resident, one who had been left behind by the community she thought she controlled. She stood there, in the middle of the street, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and embarrassment. As the officer turned and began walking back to his cruiser, Karen could feel the weight of her mistake pressing down on her like a heavy stone. In that moment, she realized this was far worse than just a simple parking issue. The illusion she had built around herself had shattered, and it was a lot more than a moving truck that had just driven her out of control. Karen stood motionless, her hands trembling at her sides. The world around her felt as though it had shifted on its axis. She stared at Greg, his smug grin burning into her like a brand. How did I miss all of this? The words echoed in her mind, but they were drowned out by a rising tide of confusion and anger. Her entire sense of control, her carefully constructed world of rules and order, was crumbling before her eyes. Greg's grin widened, clearly enjoying the uncomfortable silence that had settled between them. The officer, having concluded his brief conversation with the family, was now slipping back into his car, leaving Karen standing in the middle of the street, exposed. The moving truck sat innocuously in front of her house, its presence now a silent reminder of her monumental mistake. "Karen," Greg drawled, his voice laced with mock sympathy, "you really should pay more attention to what's happening around here. You're not the queen of Oak Ridge Street anymore, you know." The words cut deeper than Karen could have anticipated. Her skin flushed with heat, her pulse racing. She had always prided herself on being in control, on being the one who made the rules. But now, in the face of the truth, all that certainty was slipping away, leaving behind only the cold sting of humiliation. She tried to steady her breath, forcing a tight smile. "I don't know what you're talking about, Greg," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. "This is about the truck. The parking. That's all." Greg raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Sure, Karen. It's about the truck. But don't you think it's a little odd that you're the only one with a problem? Maybe it's time to face the facts. The world doesn't revolve around you. Not everyone's following your rules, and not everyone cares." Karen's stomach churned. She could feel the weight of Greg's words pressing in on her, threatening to suffocate her resolve. She had always seen herself as the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer. But now, standing in the wake of her failure, it felt as though the walls were closing in. She wasn't the person everyone turned to for guidance. She wasn't the one in control anymore. How could I have missed it? The thought gnawed at her, clawing at the edge of her mind. The family had been moving in for days, yet she hadn't bothered to check the neighborhood chat, hadn't bothered to welcome them, or even acknowledge their presence. She had been too busy enforcing her vision of order to care about the reality of the situation. Now, the truth was impossible to ignore. The officer's car started up, its engine humming as he pulled away, leaving behind the remnants of Karen's dignity in the street. The family, still oblivious to the storm that had just passed, continued unloading their boxes, completely at ease in their new home. Karen watched them, her mind spinning with the sudden realization that she had no control here. The neighborhood wasn't hers to command. She wasn't the unchallenged queen of Oak Ridge Street. She was just another resident, no more important than anyone else. Her gaze shifted back to Greg, who was still standing there, clearly enjoying the spectacle of her unraveling. His smug expression was like salt in the wound, each passing second of silence feeling like a small eternity. She could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up her neck, her pride bruised beyond repair. Greg wasn't done. "Look, Karen," he said with an exaggerated sigh, as though explaining something to a child. "I get it. You like things neat. You like things in order. But the reality is, the world doesn't work like that. People don't care about your petty rules anymore. Maybe it's time you woke up and realized that." A bitter taste rose in Karen's throat. She wanted to snap at him, to lash out and defend herself, to claw her way back to some semblance of power. But she knew, deep down, that Greg was right. Her self-imposed authority had no real basis anymore. She had tried to control the situation, to impose her will on her neighbors. But the world had moved on without her. Greg's expression softened, as though sensing the shift in Karen's demeanor. He stepped closer, his voice now laced with something almost pitying. "You don't have to do this, Karen. You don't have to keep pretending you're in charge. Just let go. Accept it." Karen's chest tightened as his words sank in. Let go. It felt like the hardest thing she'd ever been asked to do. She had spent so much of her life clinging to control, thinking that the only way to maintain order was to assert dominance, to make everyone follow her rules. But now, it felt like all that effort had been in vain. She opened her mouth to say something. Anything. But the words caught in her throat. The realization was too overwhelming, too final. There was no denying it. She had been wrong. And it wasn't just about the truck or the family. It was about everything. The way she had tried to bend the world to her will. Greg didn't wait for her response. With a shrug, he turned and walked back to his house, leaving Karen standing there in the middle of the street, her world completely altered. As she watched him disappear into his front door, a deep, hollow silence settled over Oak Ridge Street. The family continued unloading their truck, the world moving forward, indifferent to Karen's quiet unraveling. In that moment, Karen realized her need for control had become her own prison. And now she was the one left outside, watching as everything she thought she knew slipped away. Karen's breath hitched as she stood frozen on the sidewalk, her gaze fixed on the family's truck. Every inch of her body screamed to regain control, to assert her authority, but the words wouldn't come. She felt like a spectator in her own life, helplessly watching the unraveling of everything she had once thought she could control. Her feet seemed rooted to the ground as she fought to make sense of what was happening. The officer's dismissal, Greg's mocking tone, the fact that she had been so blind to the shift in her neighborhood, all of it swirled in her mind like a storm, an overwhelming, suffocating force she couldn't escape. A strange, uncomfortable silence stretched between her and the family across the street. They were still unloading their truck, still carrying boxes into their new home with ease and casual cheer. Not a single one of them looked in her direction. It was as if she didn't even exist in their world. And for the first time, it struck Karen. She didn't belong here anymore. Her fingers curled into tight fists at her sides. "I need to fix this," she thought, the old familiar drive to regain control flaring back to life. But how? How could she fix something that wasn't broken? She glanced back at her house, her once perfect house, surrounded by neatly trimmed hedges and pristine lawns, felt like a farce. The facade of order she had spent years building now seemed hollow, like a paper-thin mask slipping off to reveal the messy, vulnerable truth beneath. She had spent so much of her life trying to dictate how things should be. But now, standing on this street, she felt more powerless than ever before. A deep sense of dread crawled up her spine. If she couldn't control this, if she couldn't fix the neighborhood's perception of her, what was left? Was she nothing more than a relic of her own past, clinging to outdated beliefs in a world that had moved on? Karen turned sharply, her eyes catching Greg's house once more. He had gone inside, but she could feel the weight of his words pressing against her, heavy and suffocating. She wanted to hate him for what he had said, for exposing her vulnerability. But in truth, she couldn't. He's right. The anger she had been holding on to started to bubble up again, but this time, it wasn't aimed at the family or even the officer. It was aimed at herself. She had tried to control everything, to box herself into this rigid idea of authority. But now, with the truth laid bare before her, she realized how hollow it all was. Karen finally turned away from the street, her mind still racing. She had to get out of here. She needed air, space to think, to clear her head. She walked quickly back into her house, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed in the empty hallway like a gunshot, sharp and final. The house felt oppressive, its walls closing in on her as if they, too, were complicit in her downfall. She walked through the rooms, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings that no longer felt comforting. The pristine furniture, the meticulously arranged decor. All of it now felt like a cage. It wasn't just the house that had changed, it was her. She stopped in front of the large mirror in the hallway, staring at her reflection. The woman in the glass seemed foreign to her now, her face tense, her eyes wide with uncertainty. This wasn't the Karen she knew. The one who had commanded attention, who had known exactly how to navigate every situation. This was someone else, someone who had lost her grip on the world she thought she ruled. Her chest tightened as the realization hit her full force. She wasn't just losing control of her street, she was losing herself. The tears came then, quiet at first, just a few drops that clung to her lashes, but soon enough they fell freely, each one a reminder of how far she had fallen. The walls, the house, the street, none of it mattered anymore. What she had tried to hold onto so desperately had slipped through her fingers, and there was no way to undo it. Maybe this is what it feels like to let go, she thought bitterly. To let go of the illusion that I'm in charge of everything. For the first time, she didn't know what to do next. The once clear path she had followed was gone, replaced by an unsettling void. Her world, so carefully constructed, was now in ruins, and she had no idea how to rebuild it. The sound of footsteps outside broke her thoughts, and Karen glanced up, startled. The family was still outside, still unpacking. They hadn't left. They were settling in, completely unbothered by the storm Karen had just weathered in her own mind. With a bitter sigh, Karen turned away from the mirror. She couldn't stand to look at herself any longer. She had to face the truth. Her world was no longer hers to control, and it might be time to learn how to live with that. But how? How could she live with this? The question lingered in the air as Karen sank onto the couch, her mind whirling with uncertainty. The hours seemed to stretch on endlessly as Karen sat motionless on her couch, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The weight of the day's events pressed down on her, suffocating every thought, every breath. She couldn't escape the images that kept replaying in her mind. Greg's smug face, the officer's calm dismissal, and the new family across the street, oblivious to the chaos they had unintentionally sparked. The stillness of her home felt like a tomb. The silence, once comforting, now seemed oppressive, like a constant reminder of the emptiness she felt inside. She had lost control. And worse, she had lost herself in the process. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 5 o'clock. The evening was creeping in, and the last remnants of daylight slanted through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. The soft rustling of the trees outside was the only sound breaking the silence. What now? The question gnawed at her, but it was one she didn't want to face. She had always prided herself on having a plan, on knowing what to do next. But now she had nothing. The doorbell rang, slicing through the quiet like a knife. Karen froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't been expecting anyone. She stood up abruptly, her feet dragging as she walked toward the door, her mind still foggy, caught in a web of confusion and self-loathing. She opened the door, and there, standing on her porch, was the last person she ever expected to see, the new neighbor. It took Karen a moment to process it. The man from the moving truck. He stood there with a polite smile, holding a bottle of wine in one hand, the other hand resting casually at his side. "Good evening," he said, his voice warm but cautious, as if unsure of how to proceed. "I'm Greg from across the street. I wanted to come over and introduce myself properly. I know there's been some tension with the parking situation earlier, and I thought, well, it might be nice to clear the air." Karen's heart thudded in her chest, her mind scrambling for words. She hadn't expected this, hadn't wanted this. But there he was, standing in front of her, offering an olive branch. The same man who had watched her unravel earlier. The same man who had so effortlessly revealed the cracks in her carefully constructed world. A strange mixture of shame and surprise washed over her. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. She could feel her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't how she had envisioned things going. She had imagined confronting her neighbors, standing her ground, asserting her authority. Not this. Greg's smile softened, sensing her discomfort. Look, I get it. I'm new here, and things must feel a little strange, especially with everything that happened today. But I just wanted to say that I don't want there to be bad blood between us. We're all neighbors after all. And, well, we're hoping to fit in, you know. Karen blinked, caught off guard by the genuine tone in his voice. For a moment, the anger and frustration that had consumed her melted away, replaced by a dull ache in her chest. She had spent so much time focusing on her own sense of control, on defending her position, that she had forgotten what it was like to simply be a neighbor. Her eyes flicked to the bottle of wine in Greg's hand, and for the first time in hours, she felt a flicker of something familiar. Normalcy. She hadn't been able to control anything today, but maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to start fresh. She stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. "Please," she said, her voice quieter than she intended, but it held an invitation nonetheless. "Come in. We can talk." Greg nodded, walking inside with a gracious smile. As he entered, Karen felt a strange warmth settle over her. It wasn't power or control, but something gentler, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. They sat down in the living room, the bottle of wine now between them, and began to talk. Not about the truck, not about the rules, but about life, about the neighborhood, about work, about nothing and everything. For the first time that day, Karen felt the tightness in her chest ease, just a little. Greg spoke with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove, and in his casual presence, Karen felt something she hadn't expected to find. A sense of connection, of belonging. She realized with a sinking feeling that she had been so caught up in trying to control her surroundings that she had forgotten what it was like to simply live in them. As the evening wore on, Karen realized something else, that her world didn't need to be controlled, it needed to be shared. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something different, something better. But as the conversation continued, the tension in Karen's mind remained, the awareness that she had lost something precious. The real question now wasn't about what she could control, it was about what she was willing to let go of. The night had settled in, thick and quiet, as Karen and Greg sat across from each other in her living room. The small bottle of wine was now nearly empty, the remnants forgotten in their casual conversation. For the first time in what felt like ages, Karen wasn't thinking about rules or control or the neighborhood's expectations. She was just listening. Greg had that rare kind of charisma, the kind that made you forget time. They talked about everything and nothing. The neighborhood's quirks, the best coffee spots in town, the funny mix-up with the mail last week. Laughter came easily, though Karen caught herself more than once, feeling a sharp pang of guilt for letting her guard down. A glance at the clock made her realize the evening had slipped by, hours gone in the blink of an eye. Was this really happening? And yet something gnawed at her, the gnawing feeling that perhaps she hadn't learned everything she needed to. The rawness of the day still lingered beneath the surface. The mistakes, the panic, the shame. All of it wrapped around her heart like a vice, squeezing tighter with every passing minute. "I should probably let you get back to your unpacking," Karen said, her voice quieter now, more reflective than she meant. Greg's smile softened. "Don't worry about it. We'll get to it tomorrow. This has been nice." She hesitated, the words weighing heavily on her tongue. "I just want to apologize for how I acted today," she said, the sincerity in her voice unmistakable. I wasn't thinking straight. I thought I could fix things, make everything perfect. But it's not my job to control everything. And I'm sorry if I made you or your family feel unwelcome." Greg regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, his voice calm but firm. "I appreciate you saying that, Karen. But here's the thing. We both know this didn't start with the truck or the parking. It's bigger than that. You've spent years trying to control everything around you, and maybe you don't even realize it. Maybe you don't realize how it pushes people away." Karen froze. His words hit her like a wave crashing against jagged rocks, raw and sharp. She wanted to defend herself, to argue that she had only ever tried to help, to maintain some semblance of order. But she knew, deep down, Greg was right. He continued, his voice gentle but resolute. "Karen, there's more to life than rules. More to life than making sure everyone follows the right way. You have to let go at some point. People don't need to be controlled. They need to be understood." The weight of his words settled on Karen's chest, and for the first time, the anger that had clouded her judgment began to dissipate. It wasn't about the truck or the parking space or the neighborly disputes. It was about her need to control everything, to bend the world to her will. And that had never been about anyone else but herself. She swallowed hard, trying to push past the lump in her throat. "I've been so caught up in trying to be perfect. I thought if I could make everything fit my idea of how it should be, I could avoid the chaos, the unpredictability. But all I've done is isolate myself." Greg's eyes softened, and he leaned forward. "We all try to keep control in our lives, Karen. But sometimes, it's the unpredictability that makes life interesting. That's where real connection happens, not in the perfect, not in the planned." For a moment, Karen was silent, the truth sinking deep into her soul. She had always been the one with the answers, the one who kept everything in line. But now, she realized, that wasn't enough. People didn't need her to be perfect. They needed her to be real. They needed her to meet them where they were, not where she wished they would be. I think I need to start letting go," she said, her voice small but resolute. "Not everything needs to be perfect. Not everything can be perfect." Greg nodded approvingly, the kindness in his eyes steadying her. "You'll figure it out. We all do." There was a long pause, the weight of the evening finally settling into the space between them. Karen felt a strange sense of calm washing over her, like the storm inside her had finally passed. The fear, the anxiety, gone, and in its place, a new kind of freedom she hadn't known she was missing. When Greg stood to leave, she followed him to the door, the weight of his words still buzzing in her mind. "Thank you," she said quietly, meaning it more than she had meant anything in a long time. "For everything." Greg smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're welcome, Karen. Remember, it's okay to let go. It's okay to not have all the answers." As he walked back across the street, Karen stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into his house. The lights of the neighborhood seemed different now, softer, warmer. The world didn't need her to control it. It simply needed her to live in it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.